Natalie scoffed, swirling the deep red wine in her glass before taking a slow sip. The dim lighting of the restaurant cast a warm glow over the group of women gathered around the table, their conversation drifting between gossip, complaints about their husbands, and light-hearted laughter. Tonight the topic of discussion was Ethan, her husband of 10 years and, according to her, a suffocating, insecure man who had become unbearable. "He's always watching me like I'm about to run off with someone," Natalie said, shaking her head dramatically. "I swear it's exhausting. You'd think after all these years he'd trust me by now." She let out an exasperated sigh, her polished nails tapping against the stem of her wine glass. A few of the women nodded sympathetically. They had heard this story before. To them, Natalie was the charming, confident woman who always seemed to be in control of her life, always knew how to handle a man. If she said Ethan was paranoid, it must be true. Julia, however, wasn't nodding. She sat quietly, stirring the ice in her cocktail with her straw, her expression unreadable. "And get this," Natalie continued, lowering her voice just enough to make them lean in. "He actually went through my phone last week. Can you believe that? Like full-on invasion of privacy. I told him if he's that insecure, maybe he should see a therapist instead of treating me like some kind of criminal." Laughter rippled around the table. "It sounds possessive," one of the women chimed in. "That's not healthy, Nat." "Exactly," Natalie agreed, leaning back with a satisfied smile. "I swear I feel like I can't even breathe without him questioning me." Julia's fingers tightened slightly around her glass. Something about the way Natalie spoke, the effortless way she painted herself as the victim, the amusement in her tone, didn't sit right. She had known Ethan for years, and while he wasn't the most expressive man, she had never once gotten the impression that he was controlling. If anything, he was patient to a fault. Her phone buzzed. Julia glanced down, expecting another work email or maybe a message from her husband. Instead, her breath caught in her throat. "Nathan, babe, last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you." Her stomach twisted. She wasn't one to jump to conclusions, but there was no mistaking what she was looking at. The message was clear, intimate, and it was addressed to Natalie. Julia's heart pounded as she read it again, her mind racing. She wasn't sure what made her check the notification. Maybe instinct, maybe the growing unease she'd been feeling all night. But now there was no denying what she was seeing. Her eyes flickered back up to Natalie, still laughing, still basking in the attention of her friends, as she tore Ethan down piece by piece. Julia's decision was made. That night, as she lay in bed, she typed out a message. "Julia, I think you should see this." She attached the screenshot. Sent. Ethan sat in his study, staring at the message from Julia, his jaw clenched as he read it again, his mind working through the implications. "Nathan, babe, last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you." The words burned into his brain like a brand, each one chipping away at the trust he had spent a decade believing was unshakable. Julia hadn't said much in her message. She didn't need to. The screenshot spoke for itself. He could tell she had debated whether to send it. She wasn't the type to involve herself in other people's marriages lightly. If she had reached out, it meant she was certain. Ethan exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair. His hands rested on his lap, steady. If Natalie had expected an outburst, she would be disappointed. He wasn't the kind of man to fly into a rage or hurl accusations without proof. No, if she was lying to him, if she had truly betrayed him, he would let the truth do its work. His first instinct was to confront her immediately, to hold up the message and ask for an explanation, but he knew better. Natalie was too good at twisting stories. She would find a way to turn it back on him, gaslighting him, making him second-guess everything. She would accuse him of being paranoid, controlling, exactly the things she had been telling her friends. No, he wouldn't give her that chance. Instead, he needed more. He needed undeniable proof. Ethan stood and walked over to his desk, unlocking the top drawer where he kept his personal tablet. He was never one to snoop, but something told him Natalie's deception went deeper than a single message. He navigated to their shared phone account, something she had long forgotten he had access to. A few clicks and suddenly there it was. Call logs, text messages, timestamps that painted a picture far clearer than the lie she had been feeding their friends. There were late-night calls to a number he didn't recognize, messages deleted, but enough remnants left behind in their cloud backups to confirm his suspicions. Nathan. The name appeared over and over, always in the gaps of time when Natalie claimed to be out with her friends, working late, or at the gym. Ethan's stomach tightened. He had never been the jealous type, never felt the need to monitor his wife's whereabouts, but now, looking at the digital trail she had left behind so carelessly, he felt something cold settle in his chest. She had been sloppy, overconfident. For a woman so skilled at spinning narratives, she had underestimated him. He picked up his phone and dialed Julia. She answered after the first ring. "You saw it," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I saw it," Ethan confirmed. There was a pause before he asked, "How long have you known?" Julia hesitated. "A few weeks," she admitted. "I didn't want to believe it at first, but then I started noticing things. The way she talks about you, the way she plays the victim. And then, last night, that message popped up on her phone while we were at dinner. I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore." Ethan let out a slow breath. "Thank you for telling me." "She thinks she's untouchable," Julia said, and there was something almost angry in her voice. Like she's always the smartest person in the room, like she can twist anything to suit her story. But she's not as careful as she thinks she is. Ethan glanced back at his screen, at the damning evidence right in front of him. "No," he said, his voice calm, measured. "She's not." Another pause. "What are you going to do?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He could already picture how this would play out. How Natalie would react when she realized her carefully built house of lies was starting to crumble. She would try to weasel her way out, deny, redirect, charm. But she wouldn't see the real betrayal coming, because when the truth finally unraveled, it wouldn't be Ethan who exposed her. It would be the very people she had trusted to believe her lies. A slow, knowing smirk formed on his lips. "I'm going to let her think she's winning," he said simply. "And then, I'm going to watch her lose everything." Ethan spent the next few days in quiet observation, saying nothing, giving Natalie no reason to suspect that he knew. If anything, he played his role perfectly, remaining the patient, understanding husband who simply adored his wife. He still kissed her goodbye when she left in the morning, still responded to her texts with warmth, still listened as she ranted about her day. But behind that practiced calm, his mind was working. Natalie, oblivious, had no idea the walls were closing in on her. She carried on as usual, spinning her web of deception with the same confidence that had always served her well. Ethan watched as she left for drinks with the girls, her perfume lingering in the air long after she walked out the door. He didn't ask her where she was going. He didn't need to. He already knew. His patience was rewarded the following evening. As she scrolled through her phone, completely absorbed, she didn't notice him standing in the doorway. Her expression flickered. Amusement, desire, something secretive. As she typed quickly, her fingers dancing across the screen. Ethan could only imagine what she was saying, but he knew who she was saying it to. He took a casual step forward, making just enough noise to alert her to his presence. Immediately, she locked her phone and looked up, her lips curling into a practiced smile. "Hey babe," she said sweetly, slipping her phone onto the table as if nothing had happened. "You need something?" Ethan returned her smile, shaking his head. "Just wondering if you wanted to watch a movie tonight." Her eyes flickered, calculating. "Oh," she said, feigning disappointment. "I actually told the girls I'd meet them later. Maybe tomorrow?" There it was, another lie. He nodded easily, as if he believed her. "Sure. Tomorrow then." Natalie leaned over, pressing a soft kiss to his cheek before standing. "I should get ready," she murmured, stretching in a way that she knew would distract him. "You don't mind, right?" "Of course not," he replied smoothly. But the moment she disappeared into the bedroom, his phone was in his hand. He had been careful not to raise any alarms, but tonight was different. Tonight he needed confirmation. A few taps, and the GPS tracker he had installed on her car lit up. She had laughed when he had suggested installing it months ago, claiming it was for safety reasons in case anything ever happened. Ironically, she had agreed, never suspecting that one day it would be used against her. As expected, her car didn't head to the restaurant where she had claimed she was meeting her friends. Instead, it took a direct route to a luxury hotel on the other side of town. Ethan stared at the screen, watching the tiny blinking dot settle in the parking lot. His jaw tightened. Nathan, that was where she was going, where she had likely been going for weeks, if not longer. For a brief moment, Ethan felt the anger stir inside him, hot and sharp, demanding action. He pictured himself driving to that hotel, storming through the doors, catching her in the act. He imagined the confrontation, the way she would scramble for an excuse, the way she would stammer through half-truths before realizing there was no escape. But then he took a slow breath, forcing himself to step back from that impulse. That wasn't his style. He wasn't going to hand her the chance to paint herself as the victim, to twist this into another story about how he was the unreasonable, possessive husband. No, that would be too easy for her. Instead, he picked up his phone and scrolled to Julia's message thread. "Ethan, she's at the Fairmont Hotel, room 716. A few moments later, the typing bubble appeared. Julia understood. Ethan locked his phone and leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. This was no longer just about Natalie's betrayal. It was about how she had manipulated everyone, how she had spun her lies so seamlessly that even their closest friends had believed her. But now, the very people she had been so confident in deceiving were about to turn against her. By the time she got home tonight, she wouldn't realize it yet. She would slip back into their bed, content in her victory, thinking she had fooled him yet again. But Ethan wouldn't say a word, not yet. He would let her continue weaving her lie, let her believe she was in control, and when the time came, he would let the truth unravel in front of everyone. And this time, she wouldn't be the one telling the story. Natalie came home late that night, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor as she set down her purse. The house was dark, except for the faint glow coming from Ethan's study. He was still awake, which wasn't unusual, but something about the quietness unsettled her. Still, she wasn't worried. Why would she be? She had spent years perfecting the art of deception, of molding reality to fit whatever version suited her best. Ethan had never questioned her before, not in a way that mattered. And if he had suspicions now, well, she would handle them, just as she always had. Slipping off her coat, she stepped into the room, her expression warm, effortless. "You're up late," she said casually, moving behind him and resting her hands on his shoulders. She pressed a soft kiss to his neck, as if she hadn't just spent hours wrapped around another man. "Everything okay?" Ethan didn't tense. He didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned into her touch, his voice smooth, unreadable. "Yeah, just finishing some work." Natalie smiled, relieved. If there had been any doubt in his mind, she had just erased it. He was so predictable, so easy to manipulate. "Well," she murmured, her fingers trailing along his collarbone. "Come to bed soon, okay?" He nodded, offering her a small smile. "Of course." With that, she disappeared down the hall, leaving Ethan alone. He didn't follow her. He sat there in silence, his hands folded, his heartbeat steady. If she thought he was predictable, if she believed she still had control of the story, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. The next day, Ethan played his part as if nothing had changed. He kissed her goodbye in the morning, let her believe that everything was normal, but as soon as she was gone, he set his plan in motion. Julia had already taken the lead. Over the past week, she had been subtly planting seeds of doubt among their shared friends, questioning the version of events Natalie had been feeding them. She was careful, methodical. She didn't outright accuse Natalie of lying, she simply started asking the right questions. "Have you noticed how she always changes the subject when you ask about Ethan? She says he's controlling, but have you ever actually seen him act that way? I don't know if something just isn't adding up." At first, the responses had been dismissive, but the more Julia nudged, the more cracks began to show. Natalie had spent so much time convincing everyone that Ethan was the villain that she had failed to consider what might happen if someone turned the mirror back on her. It all came to a head that evening. Natalie had invited her friends out for drinks, as she often did. It was her usual routine: hold court, spin her version of reality, ensure that everyone was on her side. She was the victim, the misunderstood wife, trapped in a marriage with a man who just didn't appreciate her. She played the role well, too well, because this time, her audience wasn't as eager to believe her. "So, how's Ethan?" Julia asked, her tone deliberately light. "Still being paranoid?" Natalie scoffed. "Oh, you know how he is. He's been even worse lately. It's like he thinks I have something to hide." She rolled her eyes, taking a sip of her drink. "Honestly, I feel like I'm living with a prison guard." Julia nodded, exchanging a glance with one of the other women. "That's interesting," she said, "because he doesn't seem to be watching you very closely at all." Natalie's smile faltered slightly. "What's that supposed to mean?" Julia set down her glass, leaning forward just a fraction. "It means, Natalie, that we're not as blind as you think we are." The air shifted. The easy, playful energy of the group hardened into something heavier, something more dangerous. Natalie let out a small, nervous laugh. Okay, what's going on? One of the other women pulled out her phone. You might want to explain this, she said, sliding it across the table. Natalie's stomach dropped as she looked down. It was a screenshot, her text exchange with Nathan, the same one Julia had sent to Ethan. Her pulse pounded. Where did you get this? She demanded, her voice sharper now. Julia tilted her head. Does it matter? Natalie looked around, realizing for the first time that the faces staring back at her weren't filled with sympathy or blind loyalty. They were watching her, waiting. For the first time, she was on the wrong side of the narrative. She scrambled for control. Okay, hold on. This isn't what it looks like. Someone must have... Don't, Julia interrupted, her voice firm. Don't lie to us. Natalie opened her mouth, but the words caught in her throat. This was different. She had always been able to control the conversation, to twist things just enough to keep herself safe. But now, with the evidence staring her in the face, with her own friends looking at her with suspicion instead of belief, she had nowhere to run. Someone cleared their throat, and Natalie turned, feeling her stomach twist into knots. Ethan was standing there, calm as ever. Do you still have those messages, Julia? He asked, his voice smooth, almost casual. Julia nodded, holding up her phone. I do. Silence. Natalie froze, panic flashing in her eyes. Ethan tilted his head slightly, watching her, waiting. And then, with a slow, knowing smirk, he said, Looks like I wasn't the problem after all. Natalie's world began to collapse. The silence that followed Ethan's words was thick with tension. Natalie's heart hammered in her chest, but she didn't say a word. She could feel her pulse in her ears, the weight of her lies finally catching up to her. For the first time in years, she was speechless, unable to twist the situation into her favor. Ethan, however, wasn't in a hurry. He stood there, calm and composed, his arms crossed loosely across his chest, as if he were observing a particularly interesting show. He knew exactly how this would play out, how the walls she had built around herself would come crumbling down, piece by piece. Julia didn't move. She held up her phone like it was a weapon, the messages still clear on the screen. But now the other women at the table weren't even pretending to care about what Natalie had to say. They stared at her, their expressions a mix of disbelief, disappointment, and judgment. Finally, Natalie's lips trembled, her voice coming out as a mere whisper. This isn't what it looks like. I can explain. But the words felt hollow, like the last vestiges of her control were slipping through her fingers. She had been so sure of herself, so sure that she could maintain the upper hand, that she could manipulate everyone, including Ethan, into believing whatever narrative she spun. And for so long, it had worked. She had always been able to twist the truth, to bend it just enough to make herself the victim. Now the truth had arrived and there was no escaping it. Ethan took a slow step forward, his gaze never leaving hers. You've been lying to me for months, he said, his voice steady and cold, as if the conversation were nothing more than a casual chat. You've been telling everyone that I'm the problem, paranoid, controlling, untrustworthy. You've made me the villain in our story, while you were the one betraying me all along. Natalie flinched, but she didn't interrupt. The words cut deeper than she had expected, like a knife twisting inside her chest. Ethan wasn't yelling. He wasn't angry in the way she had imagined. He was calm, collected, precisely the way she had always feared he would be if he ever stopped believing her. You didn't think I would find out, did you? Ethan continued. You thought you could keep your affair hidden, keep playing the perfect wife, while you were playing me behind my back. He paused, letting the silence hang between them. Then, in a voice that was barely above a whisper, he added, I gave you the benefit of the doubt. I trusted you, but now I see you for what you really are. The words struck her like a punch to the gut. For a moment, she didn't know how to respond. Her mind was a whirlwind, 1,000 excuses forming and disintegrating before she could even vocalize them. She had always been the one in control. She had always been the one pulling the strings. But now, for the first time, she was powerless. Ethan turned to Julia, giving her a small nod of thanks. You did the right thing, he said simply. I appreciate you showing me the truth. Julia, who had been silent up until now, smiled softly. No one deserves to be treated like this, Ethan. Not you, and certainly not anyone who believes her lies. Natalie's face burned with shame, her world crashing down around her. How had it all gone so wrong? She had been careful, hadn't she? She had planned every move, every lie, every excuse. But somehow, it wasn't enough. Her gaze flicked back to Ethan, her voice breaking. "Please, Ethan, I never meant for it to get this far. No." His voice cut through her words like a knife. "Don't try to make excuses. You've already said everything you needed to say. All those lies, all those little manipulations, they've been building up for months. I don't need to hear your explanations now." She swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words sink in. It was over. There was no going back, no way to fix the mess she had created. She had thought she could control him, control the situation, but now she realized how wrong she had been. The women at the table were still watching her, their eyes no longer filled with sympathy. One by one, they began to stand up, exchanging glances that spoke volumes. They had all believed her at one point. They had all rallied around her, listening to her version of the story, believing that Ethan was the problem. But now, the truth was undeniable, and they weren't interested in hearing any more of her excuses. One of the women, who had been her closest friend, took a final look at Natalie. "I don't know who you are anymore, Natalie. I don't want to be a part of this." And just like that, they were gone. Natalie stood alone in the room, her hands trembling, her breath shallow. The walls, the lies, the carefully constructed world she had built for herself, it had all come crashing down in an instant. Ethan didn't say anything more. He simply turned and walked out of the room, leaving her to face the wreckage of everything she had tried to hold on to.